Good evening. Thanks for joining us on this primary election day. I'm Susan Murphy. Voters in San Diego and across the state are casting ballots in today's primary election. It's all setting the stage for key races in November. KPBS reporter Beth Accomando reports from Kearny Mesa and checks in on mail-in ballots and new laws regarding voter registration.
I'm here at the Registrar of Voters on Election Day, and I am speaking with Michael Vu from the Registrar of Voters. Tell me, how does the turnout seem to be so far?
Well, right now we have 275,000 mail ballots that have been returned thus far. We just picked up from the U.S. Postal Service approximately another 30,000 mail ballots. So thus far for a gubernatorial primary election, it's looking pretty robust. I anticipate the mail ballots that we will report out at 8:01 p.m. will be about a third of the results, if not a little bit more than that.
Now, if somebody is not registered, does this mean they have no opportunity to vote today?
Actually, for the first time in this statewide election, an individual has the ability to register and vote here at our office. So all hope is not lost for those individuals for this upcoming election, as well as all forthcoming elections. And the reason why is because this new state law called conditional voter registration allows a person to come to our office, register, and vote same day. And that's continued to occur since May 22nd and up to today at the polls when the polls close at 8 p.m.
Now, we live in a time of instant gratification, so on Election Day, people expect to know the answers immediately. But is this the case?
Not any longer, and the reason why that's the case is because Election Day, we're only going to report out those mail ballots that are into the count as of 8 p.m., and then all of the results from the polling locations. After Election Day is when our work continues, 30 days before I certify the election, where we're going to continue counting eligible mail ballots that were dropped off at the polls, as well as all the provisional ballots that were cast at the polls as well. So there's still a lot of work ahead of us besides just today.
That was Michael Vu of the Registrar of Voters. I'm Beth Accomando here in Kearny Mesa.
KPBS News spoke with voters leaving the Silvergate Yacht Club polling site about why they feel it's important to vote.
It's our duty. We have freedom and we should, take advantage of it and have a say in what happens, and I feel if you don't vote, you have no right to complain.
That's our responsibility, as U.S. citizens, we're given the opportunity to speak up and, we have a choice, so we should stand up for it.
Volunteers in City Heights spent Election Day knocking on doors and making phone calls. They weren't asking people to vote a certain way. They were just asking them to cast their ballots in the low turnout community.
So shake gates, y'all reach signs.
For the past months, we have been calling and door knocking, excessively trying to remind folks to vote and educate them on why it is important to vote for their community. We have tablets this time around, so now that you're calling and you're like, hey, is this voter home? It tells you their age, it tells you if they're a vote by mail voter, and then you're able to ask them a survey. We have a survey of 3 questions, and for today our questions are, have you already voted, and if you haven't, what time are you going to the polls?
Thank you.
In 2016 we ran a small program. It was at a much smaller scale, and we still were able to turn out of our universe, which was like 1,500, we turned out 1,041 voters.
Hello, ma'am. How are you?
Oh, are you Jehovah's Witnesses? No.
Oh, no. We're just going around the community to remind people that today's voting day.
When we talk to our voters, they're voting at a high rate because we're reminding them. We're not just calling them once and forgetting about them.
KPBS will be bringing you periodic live election results after the polls close at 8 o'clock. And our hour-long election special starts at 10 o'clock tonight. We have reporters on scene at the Democratic and Republican headquarters. And at Golden Hall in downtown, where Amitha Sharma will join us. Amitha, can you give us a little taste of what to expect?
I can, Susan. All eyes are on California this evening as voters decide who will compete against whom in the race to replace Governor Jerry Brown. Will it be Democrat versus Democrat? Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom squaring off against former Los Angeles Mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, or will San Diego businessman John Cox, a Republican, pull ahead? And will a field of Democrats splinter the vote just enough to lock out a party candidate in the campaign to inherit Republican Congressman Darrell Issa's seat in the 49th District? It's one of 7 California congressional races that National Democratic Party leaders are hoping to flip. It promises to be an exciting election night, Susan. I'll have analysis from columnist and host of Navarrete Nation, Ruben Navarrete, and publisher of La Prensa San Diego, Art Castañaras, on these races and others, including the contests for DA, sheriff, and 2 seats on the Board of Supervisors.
Thanks, Amitha. Again, our election special starts at 10 o'clock tonight. We'll be broadcasting live on radio and TV here on KPBS. Your decision at the ballot box today could have deep and lasting impacts. Case in point, Proposition 13, which voters passed 40 years ago tomorrow. The measure to limit property tax increases kept many struggling Californians in their homes, but it posed new problems the state still grapples with today. KPBS education reporter Megan Burks looks at its legacy with UC San Diego professor Isaac Martin.
We have a new revolution against the arrogant politicians and insensitive bureaucrats whose philosophy of tax, spend.
Proposition 13 I think of as a really shocking event, like almost like a meteor that landed in California in a way. It was couldn't have been predicted. There were lots of other solutions to the property tax crisis, but it had all kinds of powerful ripple effects.
So Isaac Martin, can you tell us about Prop 13 and kind of what circumstances it passed under?
At the time, people were being assessed and taxed on the market value of the homes they owned. And so if the value of your house doubled since the last time you got assessed, then your property tax bill doubled too. The voters of California were really up in arms about this, and a lot of Californians were really concerned that they might actually be taxed out of their homes.
And what has been the long-term impact of Proposition 13?
It definitely slowed the growth of property tax revenues in California. And at the time, property taxes were the main source of revenue for public schools. So it made it harder to keep up as it became more and more expensive to educate our children in California. Another thing it did was to politicize the process of raising taxes. At election time, it's constantly on people's minds, and politicians noticed and started to really kind of stake out positions on whether taxes are too high, and to really make hay of that as a partisan issue in a way that it hadn't quite been before.
You touched a little bit on schools, and there's a lot that has changed since Proposition 13 in schools, but largely because of Proposition 13, schools now rely mostly on income taxes.
That, in some ways, has actually been pretty good for equality across schools. If you finance schools only from property taxes that are local, then places where property values are high are places that can afford to support fabulous schools with a very low tax rate. Funding the schools out of state income taxes does have the effect that higher income people are paying more for educating children throughout the state.
And what are some of the other ways that schools have found to build revenue?
So they have often turned to local parcel taxes, which is a tax not on the value of your property or your home, but a tax on the mere fact of owning a parcel.
And what are some of the pros and cons of that approach?
Someone who owns a home worth $5 million might be taxed the same amount as someone who owns a home worth $200,000 because they both own a parcel. And it's created more inequality of the financing mechanism within California communities.
And to pass a parcel tax, schools have kind of had to do what the people who backed Proposition 13 were hoping for, which is lay out how this money will be spent and presumably be more accountable to the voters.
School districts in California do have to tell the voters what they intend to spend the money on. And if you look at parcel tax measures, you'll see they're often very detailed in spelling out exactly how they intend the money to be spent. I do worry sometimes that leads school districts to emphasize flashy or popular ways of spending money rather than the ways of spending money that might be what the teachers and the students most need in order to accomplish effective education.
People are talking about a possible 2020 initiative to amend Proposition 13. What would that look like?
So one of the proposals is to preserve the protection for homeowners and raise revenue by reassessing large commercial properties at their true market value, which, according to an estimate from the University of Southern California, could yield as much as $11 billion in revenue for governments of this state.
Isaac Martin, Chair of the Sociology Department here at UC San Diego. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If you visit a polling place today to cast your ballot, you'll likely be checked in by a volunteer poll worker. One of these volunteers has been at it for a long time, working 50 elections, but this primary will be his last. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser introduces us to this dedicated citizen.
This is San Diego City College Flex Building.
70-year-old Douglas Danny Miller started volunteering at polls back in 1992, though records only go back to 1996.
It's something my parents instilled in me, that voting was important. My mother actually worked polling back in the 60s in Chula Vista.
Because of that, Danny Miller said he started volunteering, and here at City College is where he continued his civic involvement for many years. But despite that, he says he's not very political.
I follow elections to some extent. I don't take strong positions on things. I just say, I want this candidate, that candidate, no, yes.
Volunteering involves setting up at 6:30 a.m. and working until after the polls close at 8 p.m. For all of that, Danny Miller gets a $150 stipend. He's retiring from his job this year as a tax preparer, so he feels it's time to hang up his poll worker hat as well. Claire Trageser, KPBS News.
The Mexican government is responding to U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum with a long list of its own tariffs on U.S. imports. The tariffs are being imposed on agricultural products like pork, apples, and potatoes. Bourbon is also on the list. So are inboard motorboats and some steel products. The tariffs range from 15% to 25%, and Mexico says it's suspending preferential tariff treatment for the U.S. Last week, the Trump administration announced tariffs on steel and aluminum from Mexico, Canada, and the European Union. The San Diego Chamber of Commerce says they fear the effects of a trade war as San Diego begins to see the impact of new tariffs imposed on material imported into the United States. KPBS reporter Steve Walsh has the story.
The San Diego Chamber of Commerce says the country has already felt the impact of tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. Manufacturing is 10% of San Diego's economy, and tariffs imposed by Mexico have begun to hit agriculture, says Paula Avila, the Chamber's Vice President of International Business Affairs.
We've already seen the cost of steel increase by 71%. The retaliatory actions on pork, for example, have driven the cost of pork down, impacting pork farmers.
San Diego is the poster child for the interconnected supply chain created through NAFTA. Goods are built on one side of the border and finished on the other. Avila says those relationships are too complex to easily unravel, even in the face of tariffs. She predicts a rise in consumer prices.
It is very difficult to unravel that. I don't see that happening. Simply what you'll see is an increase in consumer goods.
Supporters say the raising the cost of some goods imported into the U.S. helps shrink the country's trade deficit with nations like Mexico. The chamber fears any benefit will be wiped out by instability. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
A City Heights boutique offers a variety of handmade, family-inspired products, from good luck charms to granola bars. Producer Brian Myers explains how this shopping experience helps empower women entrepreneurs.
We cannot go out looking for new customers and forget about the ones that we have. So we need to repeated customers, right?
We need new people, new customers, but
we have to give incentives to the ones that we already have.
Yeah.
We can put a big sign.
Everybody has different ideas. At the end of the day, we work together and we're helping each other.
This is a Women Empower boutique, is women helping women. We have been trained for more than 12 weeks how to do it from the beginning, like from scratch. If you have an idea how to start and bring that idea as a business, what permits do you need, if you need to invest, if you need insurance, everything we have been trained for. And this is the incubator. Being all together and helping each other, I think it also makes it very like a unique place because we all learn from each other.
Rosie, she's making by hand each piece. She used natural stones and crystals. This is Mayra space, Taller de Mitatis. The program asks for ideas. I say, what can I do? Because I don't do anything except work. I started like 2 years ago making leather bracelets. I am from the center of Mexico. We use charms, lucky charms or protection charms. My great-great-grandma, when a baby born, she always gets a red ribbon and she ties in her hand. Then when the baby is like 6 months, 1 year, they start having more charms. A lot of people now is looking for the charms. This program teach me how to be more creative. Now I have the Frida Kahlo line.
All the things that we do, I think they're very unique. Even like what I sell, like salads, they're unique salads. I sell salads in a jar. Women helping women will bring us to another level for self-confidence for women. And we're learning. For us, it's good. They're helping us, but we're also helping some other families too.
Brian Myers from the Media Art Center produced that story. Morning clouds and a slight drop in temperatures are expected for tomorrow, with more warm weather ahead for the weekend. Erin Calandra has the full forecast.
Well, hopefully you had a nice day today. The weather not too bad, very typical for this time of year, and not as hot in the deserts. That's a good thing. We no longer have those heat advisories. Looking ahead, we have a deep marine layer. That means lots of clouds in the morning. It's going to keep us right around average for our temperature, but a shallow marine layer later this week, and you'll notice an uptick in our temperatures when that happens. And then next week we are going to have a nice warming trend. Let's take a peek right now at the satellite. Not much is happening. It's pretty quiet here across San Diego County. And the big picture, well, there might be a couple of clouds to the north of us, but really the southwest is staying very quiet, except for again in the morning time when we have those clouds breaking up for sunshine by the afternoon. So for tonight, 62 degrees. Those clouds will be building overnight just along the coast. The interior areas will look a lot clearer. Oceanside, the low tonight, 58 degrees. And in Chula Vista, 61. Mount Laguna at 52 degrees. And Borrego Springs, a comfortable 70 degrees. Yikes. Tomorrow, Borrego Springs up to 101. Again, that's about average. Not nearly as warm as it was yesterday. Oceanside at 71 degrees tomorrow. San Diego, 69. And in Ramona, 79 degrees. And we'll have plenty of sunshine for everybody to enjoy. Now, Wednesday through Thursday, really, we're going to be in the low 70s because of those thick clouds. But then once they start to break up a bit thinner, we're going to get warmer up to those upper 70s for the weekend. In the interior areas, again, in the mid 70s to start off with. But for the weekend, we're warming it up to the mid to low 80s with plenty of sunshine. In the mountains, we're going to be in the low 70s. And for the weekend, jumping up to around 77 degrees. It's staying dry and sunny with just a few clouds around. And in the deserts, well, it is cooking. We're talking triple digits every single day. By the weekend, we're talking 104 on Saturday. Those are dangerously warm temperatures, as you know by now. Make sure you're staying hydrated and also check on your elderly neighbors, your pets, and your kiddos. Make sure everyone is staying nice and cool. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Susan, back to you.
A former swimmer has dived into a new Olympic sport. AP reporter Mike Householder explains how she's taking the lead on the dance floor.
Nobody puts Cheryl in a corner. Cheryl Angelelli is a former Paralympic swimming champion who has become world-class in another sport.
I retired from swimming in 2014, and obviously it left this huge void in my life, competing and training, and was looking for something different, and that's how I kind of got into wheelchair ballroom dancing.
The 49-year-old and her partner Tamerlan Godorov last year won silver in an international competition for para dance, ballroom dancing for those with an impairment affecting the lower limbs, wowing the judges with their rendition of the famous "I've Had the Time of My Life" scene from the movie Dirty Dancing.
It is such an iconic American dance that people relate to, and they don't expect somebody in a wheelchair to do that.
Angelelli has been exceeding expectations for more than 3 decades, ever since she was paralyzed from the chest down in a diving accident. In addition to her athletic endeavors and day job in marketing, Angelelli teams with Fred Astaire Dance Studio near Detroit to offer free monthly classes for people with physical limitations.
Talk to Megan on your way out.
Now she and studio owner Evan Mountain are looking to make it possible for even more wheelchair users to take up the sport they love.
Now the Paralympic Committee and the Para Dance Sport Committee has contacted us, and they realized that in order for the United States to grow with wheelchair ballroom dancing, they needed to have trained instructors.
The studio in June will host the first organized U.S. training for para-dance instruction.
We have coaches that come here to Fred Astaire and dancers who won all kinds of championships, and they try to dance with me, and it's totally foreign to them. They're like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought. So having somebody who is specially trained and knows what they're doing is very, very important.
Beyond skill building, the goal is to spread awareness of a sport that is far more popular in Europe and Asia.
The more that we can get people trained here in the United States, I think it's really going to open up opportunities and possibilities for more people to get involved in the sport.
Until then, Angelelli will continue having the time of her life. Mike Householder, The Associated Press, Bloomfield Township, Michigan.
An adaptation of Khaled Hosseini's novel A Thousand Splendid Suns is playing at the Old Globe Theater in Balboa Park. KPBS associate producer Maria Fani tells us how the story of Afghan women coping with war resonates today.
What is this? Have I married a pair of statues?
This is the story of 2 women in Kabul, Afghanistan, married to the same man, living under one roof in a society where women's rights have been under attack. Their friendship is formed through trauma and courage.
Sometimes I think about putting chili in his toothpaste. You think Allah would forgive me for that? I know I would.
Playwright Ursula Rani Sarma says the story of suffering in 1990s war-torn Kabul is important today.
It forces you to think about your own perceptions, your own prejudices, your own expectations, and about life, about women, about the role of women in society, about the voice of women in society. And I think it's always good to challenge an audience in that way.
The story weaves through events over 3 decades of war. Old Globe artistic director Barry Edelstein says the play puts Afghan culture center stage.
It tells us a story about another part of the world that has really concerned the United States now for over a decade. And it's a pleasure to understand and to empathize with the experience of people who are, on the one hand, so remote from us, but on the other hand, are having experiences that resonate with our own humanity in a deep, deep way.
Plotting against me?
No! Stop it! Don't hurt her! You win!
Director Kerry Perloff says there are lots of similarities between the character Rashid, husband of the 2 women, and some Americans today.
There are many people in this country who feel, for whatever reason, that their jobs have been taken from them or that they have been treated unfairly, particularly men, and so when they lash out at women or people of other races, it comes from a place of fear, which is exactly what happens with Rashid.
No, mine! I want you!
Deciding which parts to use and what to leave out of the book was a challenge, says Rani Sarma.
We have created is an adaptation that feels really, really theatrical. It doesn't feel like a book that has been retold on stage, and I think that's the real success of it, actually, and something I feel quite proud of.
Perloff says it's a cathartic play that audiences have been responding to.
It's extremely sad and moving, and the audience is sort of sobbing in places, but I also think at the end it's incredibly hopeful.
The most beautiful thing I have ever seen.
For KPBS News, Amaria Fani.
1,000 Splendid Suns runs through Sunday, June 17th at the Old Globe. Don't forget to join us here later tonight for the KPBS Election Special. We'll have race results and analysis after the polls close. That starts at 10 o'clock, and we're broadcasting that on KPBS TV and radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.